2154 from Indonesia. Okay, so I've been playing d4 a lot more in the last couple speedruns, just showcasing positional ideas, but I want to switch back to e4 for this one. Okay, so let's play. Now, in the French, we've been playing the advanced, pretty religious. Okay, never mind. He plays b6. So he plays b6, which is a transposition to Owen's defense. Generally, this is reached via e4, b6, d4, e6. And white has a bunch of setups that I am aware of which give white an advantage. My favorite one is to play knight c3 and then bishop d3, basically to overprotect the e4 pawn. If you know anything about this system for black, you will know that there's this idea of going f5. And by overprotecting the pawn with your minor pieces, you are taking the sting out of that move. Bishop e7 is not very good. Bishop e7, as far as I know, is quite passive. And now we just develop normally. Like, I don't see a reason to reinvent the wheel here. I think the best bet is to go either knight g2 or knight f3. Either developing move is good. I think we're going to go for standard development with knight f3. Let's just go standard development. Yeah, now there's an interesting subtlety in these positions. Okay, black wants to play d5, right? And let's imagine that black plays d5. So if black plays d5 and then we play e5, black can put the knight on e4. So one move I like to make in these positions is queen e2, so that if black plays d5 and we play e5, knight e4 now loses a pawn. Black is forced to retreat to d7, but our opponent is not interested in playing it in any principled way. He's playing sort of a hippo setup, which is actually quite viable. There's nothing terribly wrong with this. White's better, but it's not winning or anything like that. Castle's probably he'll castle. Knight bd7. Okay, so here we can basically choose between playing positionally and tactically. If we were to play positionally, there is a sort of a standard idea that is often recommended in such positions to weaken black's light squares. Does anybody know what it is? And for that reason, in the hippo, you'll often see black playing the move a6 before developing the knight to d7. And that is the move... No, not a4, because a4 can be just met with a6. a4 can be met with a6. Yeah, bishop a6 is what I'm talking about. And traditionally, it's considered that such a move in many different openings tends to... So let's try it. Let's see what happens if we trade the light squared bishops. I'm not personally enthralled with this concept because I feel like our bishop on d3 is aiming at the king side. So in the event that the black castles, it is nice to retain our light squared bishop. But at the same time, this does create, as you can see, this creates a complex of weak squares on the queen side, which we can try to exploit through subtle positional play. Castle's okay. I want everybody to notice that I'm not rushing the development of my last piece, right? I don't have anywhere particularly sexy to put this bishop right now, so I'm just going to keep it on c1 for the time being. I'm going to keep it on c1, and I'm going to try to, when the position clarifies, then we will hopefully find a worthwhile square for the bishop. So many good moves in a position like this. If we want to continue with our campaign of queenside pressure, though, we should definitely play the move a4. Very typical motif. You're basically just trying to shove this pawn down to a5 and create pawn pressure on black's position. He plays c5. The c5 is an interesting move. We can respond to this with d5. We can also ignore and play a5. Although the issue potentially with a5 is that black can play c takes d4. Although there we just play knight takes d4. I don't see a problem. That's almost a Sicilian. That'll almost lead to a Sicilian structure where black has a bunch of these light square weaknesses on the queen side. I'm fine with the Sicilian structure. But if I were playing a classical game, I'd probably play d5 and get a Benoni type of structure. But here I want the position to be open. I don't mind that. Hopefully everybody can understand why it is that by bringing our pawn up like this, we are... When I say the words like causing pressure or putting pressure, hopefully you understand what that means. I'll explain that a little bit more after the game to those people who are, because that concept of pressure in chess can be very confusing, admittedly. And, Okay, so now I think in the name of putting more pressure... Yeah, I love the move rook d1 because this brings a rook into the game. We know this is a good square because it x-rays the queen, and it also supports the center. So this is the best way to put pressure. You make moves that increase the tension in the position, but we know for a fact that this is an improving move. Notice how I'm not changing the structure in the center. It's a standoff. We're basically staring at each other in the center. Who flinches first? Now, we might still play d5. Okay, knight e8 is a bad move. The first thing I notice when knight e8 is played is that it cuts the connection between the rooks. What does that mean? What move is now a lot more appealing now that black has played knight e8? What move immediately comes to mind? Well, this is why pressure is so good, right? We were holding that pawn on a5 for a while, waiting for the best opportunity to win the rook. Very good. 14 move game. That is disappointing, but it is a direct product of the pressure that we were putting on black's position. It's a direct product of the pressure that we were putting on black's position. Yeah, not a very good opening by our opponent. But there's still a lot to talk about here. So, yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, so these openings are... I just never recommend them to anybody because they're bad, and you might see Hikaru play these types of openings, but that's because he is incredibly good at weaseling his way out of bad positions. And at 2100, you certainly should not play. There are much better offbeat openings that actually give you a chance to get an interesting position. I mean, at the very least, if you're playing e6, play the French. The French is a great kind of second-rate opening that gives you a combative game. And if you want to play something super offbeat, there's plenty of stuff that's like just a lot more interesting than just giving up the center like this. Because no matter how white sets up their pieces, black is going to be worse. Which is why I don't really see the appeal of this opening. Okay, so we played knight c3 and bishop d3, which is, I think, one of the main lines. So here the main move is knight f6. Bishop e7 is very passive. In this opening, the bishop usually goes to b4. But the move bishop b4 here, let's see who paid especially careful attention to the earlier games in the speedrun. I have recommended a move here that we have played several times in the speedrun, and that's knight e2. Knight e2. By the way, common mistake in notation is to say knight g2. You don't have to say knight g2 because there's only one knight that can go to e2. The other one is pinned. And the purpose of knight g2 is to connect the... I just made that mistake. Knight e2 is to connect the knights. And if black plays, for instance, knight f6, then we can just castle. And if you compare this position and this position, well, compare the placement of the knight on e2 versus f3. What move does black have here that is totally harmless here? Well, it's obviously bishop takes e3. That's the whole point of connecting your knights like this. You take the sting out of the potential for a trade. Whereas with the knight on f3, black actually just wins a pawn. This is a common blunder. Very common blunder. By the way, another very common mistake, listen carefully because this is a mistake tons of people make, is you get a position like this, and then you say, well, I see that my opponent is threatening to win the pawn. So let me pin the knight in order to defend the pawn indirectly while also developing a piece. On the face of it, this logic sounds good, but there's a concrete flaw with this move in particular, and with the concept of using a pin to defend a pawn. What is the flaw? What is black's best move here? I see this all the time. No, not castles. Well, if black castles, then white already has like e5 and stuff. Then it's justified. Yeah, so black plays h6. You might say, well, no big deal. I just play bishop h4. But here black plays g5, and we've lost a pawn because now black has gotten rid of the pin, and black can take on e4 immediately even because you can't take with a knight. So you're forced to take the knight, but now you have given up the bishop pair, and you have made two moves with the bishop only to trade it for a knight that has moved once. And black is doing great here. So just an important note. If I were to get myself into this position, who can propose a way of defending the e4 pawn? Who can propose the best way of defending the e4 pawn? Also one of the only ways. Sunny Deity, if we play h6, a3, black will take the knight with check, and you lose a piece on g5. Yeah, queen e2. But the whole reason that we put a knight on e2 rather than on f3, here black plays d5. And here you get into this very annoying situation where black starts putting pressure on your knight, etc., etc. So for that reason, I propose the setup with knight e2. So that after knight f6, you can simply castle. You can also play a3 and kick the bishop away. And bishop takes c3 is totally harmless due to knight takes c3. Why not f3 to prevent the shenanigans, asks Nikhil 97. When are you proposing that we play f3? Here? Well, as you know, f3 is a very weakening move. You can play f3. There's nothing terribly wrong with this move, but I don't like the weaknesses that you're creating on the king side. And these are permanent. So f3 is very weakening. Very weakening. Also, black can try to run you off the board with his pawns. d5, e5, c5. And as you can tell, you're starting to... Oh, and queen h4, queen takes d4 is a problem in certain positions. So f3 in French structures is not usually a good move. Okay, bishop e7. So notice how we're flexible, right? You might look at this and say, well, didn't you just say that you're proposing that you develop the knight c2? Yeah, but the situation has changed. Black's bishop is now not on b4, it's on e7, and that changes our method of development. A very important skill in the opening is to not get... That's why system players struggle, by the way. Another reason why I don't recommend starting with the London, because you don't learn how to adapt in the opening. You play the same moves over and over again. Okay, knight f3, knight f6. Now we play queen e2. Once again, the purpose of queen e2 is that if we castle instead, black has d5, and black can put the knight on e4. Not a big deal, but something that we can easily prevent with queen e2. Okay, d6 is passive, but okay, black's setup is fine. This is, I would say, probably 0.5 or 0.6 according to the engine. Okay, so bishop a6. Super common idea in a million different openings. If you are a London player, then get out of the stream. If you are a London player or a Tory player, you should recognize that concept. So if you play a London against the King's Indian, in the London against the King's Indian, this idea exists. So something like this. Yeah. Oh, actually, Min. No. So the line that Min likes to play, he puts the bishop on c4 in the London. And a lot of our games go like this, like bishop e7, queen e2. And in bullet, I'll often forget to go a6. I'll go some random move, and then he'll play bishop a6. Very similar idea, right? White is weakening all these light squares. After queen c7, if you were paying attention to my speedrun game, what should white do here? What is the automatic move for white in these types of positions? The automatic idea. Yeah, it's to play a4, a5, and create very similar pressure to the kind of pressure that we put on our opponent. So you can see how openings are connected. The ideas can be borrowed from one opening to another. I can show you a million examples of this idea. Of course, you're probably more familiar with this idea on the king side, but it's the same idea. It's just that when it happens on the king side in an opening like the perk, when you do this, you can immediately understand the benefits of trading the fianchettoed bishop because there's a king here. When there's no king, it can be harder to see it, but it's the same type of concept. You're weakening the dark squares here, weakening the light squares there, etc. So back to the game. Queen e2, d6, castles, knight bd7, bishop a6. Okay, so he took it, castles, and a4. So c5, I think, is another mistake. c5 weakens black's position even further. It creates a weak pawn on d6. It weakens the b6 pawn. And it makes the move a5 even stronger. No, I wouldn't say that taking the bishop was a big mistake. I think black is okay here if he's careful. So what should black do here? Well, what I would do with black is probably try to smoke the queen out of a6. I'd play the move queen to c8. I'd play the move queen to c8. We would presumably not trade. We would probably play queen d3, queen e2. And now I would play the very typical move a6. Right? This is a classic pawn arrangement. The idea is to meet a5 with b5. The idea is to meet a5 with b5, and the game continues. So white is better. We've got the center. We would probably go bishop g5, but in such positions, black is obviously black is solid. Black is solid. I mean, the game is going to last a while. Rook e8. Unpleasant. Black is super cramped, but it is what it is. Ofas, no. No, at that point, it was bad for black. No, it's not drawish. It's just a middle game. You know what else I'd consider? What I'd probably play in a classical game with black is the move d5. So what I would say is, okay, the moment the queen leaves e2, the e4 square, we lose some of our control over the e4 square. So d5 becomes a possibility, and then e5, knight e4. Although here, no, here probably white can just take and go knight d2, and the pawn on e4 is going to be lost. No, this is bad. This is bad. I apologize. This is not the way. Maybe d5 and knight e8, but this looks really passive. Now we go a5, and the situation becomes even more unpleasant for black. Although even here, black is actually very solid. White is not winning in a position like that. White's just better. But this is not losing. Black is still solid, even though he's incredibly cramped after something like c6. But these positions, you don't win fast. Okay, but instead c5, a5. The line that I had to calculate, cd, knight d4, knight c5 looks very... Then we just drop our queen back to e2. And look at how weak the c6 square is. Like, we're already threatening knight c6. We're threatening a6. Like, there's just a lot of pressure on black's position. So instead, he plays h6, a weird move. We improve our position, rook d1, knight e8, and the game ends very quickly. So if he had played knight takes b6, then our placement of our rook on d1 is justified. We just play d takes c5, and we win. We win everything. So the way black should have played is queen takes b6, only move. And here we would have a choice. We can definitely trade queens and get into a much better endgame where we have a vastly superior pawn structure, better placed pieces. So reasonable option. Reasonable option number two is to not, I wouldn't not trade queens. I would try to trade on my own terms. So you could say, okay, we're not afraid of black taking our queen because our rook on a6 is going to be sexy. So you can make a move like knight b5. And if black takes, then black is in huge trouble on the queen. I mean, a7 is probably going to be lost. And if black loses a7, then black's queen side is totally decimated. So I would play probably the move knight b5. A good introduction to positional pressure this game. Kind of sad that black collapsed as quickly as he or she did. So, any questions? Knight b8 forces the trade. 1 second, we have a question from Anita. No, knight b8 blunders a rook. Yeah. All right.